The boy found the leather vest in a ditch off the I-5 frontage road, rain-soaked and heavy with mud. He was 12, exhausted from walking his sister to a bus stop, but he knew what it was: a Hell's Angels cut, the kind of item men would kill to protect. He spent 2 days working up the nerve to bring it to a bar on the edge of town. When he finally walked through that door, the silence hit him like a wall. He was 12, broke, invisible. But he held something priceless and did the one thing no one expected. He gave it back. No reward, no questions, just a grandmother's lesson: what you find, you return. That moment would test everything we think we know about fear and honor. But before those 4 words changed his life, you need to understand the world he was born into. He was 12 years old, and the world had already taught him how to be invisible. In the dark, in the rain, in a neighborhood where streetlights flickered and died, Andre moved like a shadow, his sister Jada's hand in his, her book bag heavy on his shoulder. They'd been walking this route since their grandmother could no longer afford the bus passes. Every morning before the sun, he made sure Jada caught the magnet school bus that would one day get her out. This particular morning, the rain had turned the shoulder into a marsh. His shoes, too small, soles peeling, sucked mud with every step. The freeway noise was a constant mechanical roar. Jada's bus pulled away into the mist, and Andre started the long walk home, shivering. That's when he saw it, half buried in the ditch, a heap of black leather, heavy and waterlogged. He almost kept walking. Instead, he stooped. The second he lifted it, his stomach dropped. The winged skull with its grinning teeth, the red letters stitched across a faded rocker, the road-burned scars and rusted snaps. A cut. A Hell's Angels colors. He knew what it meant, not from books, but from the way men talked about it in the storefronts he hurried past. This was a man's second skin, soaked in 2 decades of asphalt and sweat. Losing it was unthinkable. Finding it was dangerous. Possessing it could get you killed. But Andre's mind went to his grandmother. Mabel was 74, her spine curved like a question mark, her voice the law of their tiny apartment. "What you find, you return," she'd said 1,000 times, over lost wallets, dropped scarves, a neighbor's wandering cat. He could already see her face if he tried to hide this. So he tucked the soaking vest under his jacket, the chrome buttons cold against his ribs, and walked home trembling not from cold. For 2 days, the cut stayed hidden under his mattress, a radioactive secret. Andre didn't sleep. He'd search his grandmother's face for cracks in her rule, but she just stirred the grits and hummed. He'd hear a motorcycle motor blocks away, and his pulse would spike. He learned the names on the patches: a road name, a chapter, a decade. He traced the stitches with his fingers, imagining the hands that had worn it, the fights, the funerals. He knew one thing: this wasn't just lost property. This was a man's whole past, and someone somewhere was desperate to get it back. The bar was called the Spur, a windowless bunker on the county line where the Harleys sat out front like armored horses. Andre had walked past it once with his uncle, who'd pulled him closer to the curb. Now, on this third afternoon, Andre found himself standing across the street, the cut folded and wrapped in a clean plastic bag, his hands clammy. The parking lot was full. He could hear low laughter and country music bleeding through the walls. This was the place. He stood there so long a streetlight clicked on. He thought of Jada's tuition, of the roof that leaked, of Mabel's voice. Then he crossed the road, the plastic bag crinkling in his grip. He pushed open the heavy door, and the morning's cold gave way to the smell of stale beer and leather. The room went quiet. 24 men, tattooed hands frozen on pool cues, beards dripping the last drops of morning coffee. The jukebox had been unplugged at the wall, and the only sound was the slow drip of a leaky faucet behind the bar. Andre stood just inside the door, the plastic bag clutched to his chest like a shield, his 12-year-old frame framed by the gray light from outside. No one moved. No one spoke. He could feel their stares pressing on him, not hostile but something more unnerving, total, unblinking assessment. At the far end of the room, a man rose from a chair that might as well have been a throne. He was older than the others, his beard shot through with silver, his cut faded to the color of a storm cloud. The president's patch sat on his chest like a heart worn on the outside. They called him Stone. He didn't walk so much as he shifted the gravity in the room, pulling every eye toward him as he made his way across the sticky floor. Andre's throat closed. His rehearsed words vanished. Stone stopped an arm's length away. He looked down at the boy, then at the bag, then back at the boy. Andre's hands shook as he peeled open the plastic and held out the muddy, rain-warped cut. His voice came out a whisper. "I think someone's missing this." For a long, brutal second, no one reacted. Then Stone reached out and took the cut like he was handling a fallen soldier's flag. He turned it over, found the road name stitched on the inside pocket, and something cracked behind his eyes. He looked up at a man by the pool table, a giant with a red beard and a medic's patch on his arm, and nodded once. The giant disappeared through a back door without a word. Stone turned back to Andre, and when he spoke, his voice was low, a rumble that seemed to rise from the floorboards. "Son, where did you find this?" Andre told him. "The ditch, the rain, the freeway. That was almost 3 days ago. He had kept it safe. He had come because his grandmother said you return what isn't yours. He didn't mention the shoes with holes or the leaking roof or the tuition his sister couldn't afford. He just answered the question." Stone listened with his whole body utterly still. When Andre finished, the president turned to the roomful of hardened men, many of whom had not spoken a soft word in a decade, and said 4 words that would carve themselves into the lore of the club forever. "This boy is family." The air changed. It wasn't a declaration, it was a law. A giant man with a tattoo of a teardrop on his cheek put his pool cue down and nodded once. A woman behind the bar, the only woman in the room, wiped her eyes with her apron. Andre didn't understand. He thought he had returned a lost jacket and was about to be offered a handshake or maybe a free soda. But he saw the way they looked at him now, not as a trespasser, not as a kid from the wrong side of the overpass, but as if he'd just received a name. This was not a transaction. This was a bond. Down the hall, the red-bearded medic reappeared, pushing an older member in a wheelchair. His head was bandaged, his leg encased in a black brace, but his eyes were clear and desperate. This was the man whose cut it was. They called him Sarge. He'd been riding the I-5 when a semi-truck blew a tire beside him and sent his Harley into the guardrail at 60 miles an hour. By the time the ambulance came, the cut had been torn from his body by the impact and flung into the dark, into the ditch, into Andre's world. Sarge had been in a coma for 2 days. The club had scoured every inch of that frontage road with flashlights and dogs, but they'd found nothing. They'd begun to accept the cut was gone, along with the patches sewn into its lining, the memorial patch for his son, a Marine killed in Fallujah, and a faded photo of his wife who died of cancer. The vest wasn't just leather. It was a reliquary of a man's entire heart. Sarge, still unable to speak clearly, reached out a trembling hand and touched the cut as Stone laid it across his lap. He pressed the leather to his face, and his shoulders shook. No one in the room looked away. They bore witness the way only those who have lost everything and found something back can. Andre stood frozen, tears pricking his own eyes, suddenly aware that he hadn't just returned an object. He'd returned a man's reason to fight. Stone crouched down so his eyes were level with Andre. The president's face, which could have been carved from granite, was now crinkled with something the boy had never seen on an adult man's face before: humility. "You could have kept walking. You could have thrown it away." "You didn't. The angels pay their debts, son. You understand that?" Andre nodded, though he absolutely did not understand. He had no frame of reference for what was about to happen. He only knew that the giant named Stone was now resting a hand on his shoulder, a hand that felt as immovable as a concrete pillar, and that hand was trembling slightly. The man who walked into a room and silenced it was nervous to say what came next. "Sarge here would be dead if it weren't for you." Not because of the jacket, because he'd already given up looking for a reason to wake up. That vest held his boy, his wife, and you brought them back. We're gonna do something for you now, and you're gonna let us. That's not a request. Andre glanced toward the door. He thought of Mabel, waiting in the apartment that smelled of cooking oil and damp plaster, her cane tapping out the hours. He thought of the bank notice on the counter, the eviction threat she'd hidden in the Bible. Stone followed his gaze and read it all without a word. The president straightened up. "Tell me where you live." Andre gave the address, a low-numbered street in a complex the city had long forgotten to maintain. Stone turned to the room. His voice cut through the thick air. "Gage, get the trucks fueled. Bones, call the roofing crew. Doc, bring the medical kit. There's an elder lady there who might need a look. Everyone else saddles up in 10 minutes. We ride at dusk." The bar erupted into coordinated motion. Men pulled on gloves, holstered phones, tucked extinguished cigarettes into pockets. No one questioned. No one hesitated. Andre found himself being led to a side door, a gentle hand on his back. He turned around and saw Sarge one last time, the old veteran gripping his vest to his chest, mouthing the words "thank you" over and over. Stone knelt once more before he let the boy leave. "When you walked through that door, you were a stranger. Now you're blood. What's about to happen may scare you, but I promise you this. No one will harm you or your family ever again. Not while the angels exist. Now, let's go meet your grandmother." Andre stepped out into the late afternoon sun, the bar's heavy door swinging shut behind him. The parking lot was no longer a threatening fortress. It was a staging ground. In less than an hour, 60 motorcycles would darken the streets of his neighborhood, and his grandmother would watch from her window as a line of headlights approached like a slow, sacred procession. The 4 words Stone had spoken were already echoing through the club, carried on radio waves and text messages to chapters across the state, a summons that would change everything. But as Andre climbed onto the back of Stone's bike, clutching the big man's leather vest, he didn't yet know the full scale of what he'd set in motion. He only knew that for the first time in his 12 years, he was not invisible. He was not alone. And the roar of those engines was the sound of a promise being kept. The convoy rolled out of the parking lot in tight formation, 60 Harley engines thrumming a single, low note that rattled windows along the county road. Andre clung to Stone's leather vest, the wind tearing at his eyes, the world reduced to the broad back in front of him and the asphalt blurring beneath. They didn't take the freeway. They took the surface streets, through neighborhoods that hadn't seen a freshly painted line in decades, past corner stores with barred windows, past the bus stop where Andre and Jada stood in the dark every morning. People stopped on the sidewalks. Kids pointed. Old men on porches set down their dominoes and stood. It was not a parade. It was a message. This boy rides with us. By the time they reached the apartment complex, the sun had dropped behind the water tower, staining everything orange and violet. The building itself was a sagging 2-story relic, patched with plywood, its gutters rusted through, its stairwells smelling of mildew and fried onions. Mabel Campbell was at her window, as she always was at dusk, watching for her grandson. When she saw the first row of headlights cut the twilight, her hand went to her chest. She pushed open the screen door and stepped onto the landing, her cane trembling. 60 motorcycles growled to a halt. Engines cut. The silence that followed was louder than the ride. Andre slid off the bike, his legs unsteady. He looked up at his grandmother, her face creased with confusion and a kind of fear he'd never seen on her before. Before he could speak, Stone dismounted, removed his sunglasses, and walked slowly toward the stairs. He stopped at the bottom step, removed his cut, something members told him never to do, and draped it over his arm. Then he looked up at Mabel with an expression of profound respect. "Ma'am, my name is Stone. Your grandson returned something we can never repay. I gave my word in front of my whole club. You're under our protection now. Whatever you need, it's done. May we come up?" Mabel looked at Andre, who nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. She stepped aside without a word. In that single gesture, 74 years of hard living and harder suspicions were laid down. The club's medic, Doc, was the first up the stairs, carrying a leather satchel. He knelt before Mabel right on the landing and asked if he could check her blood pressure. She let him. This woman, who had not trusted a stranger since 1968, now sat still while a bearded, tattoo-covered biker wrapped a cuff around her arm. 130/80, Doc announced. "Ma'am, you're stronger than half my members, but your roof's not." Stone turned to the parking lot and raised a hand. That was the signal. Tools came out of saddlebags: hammers, crowbars, nail guns, rolls of roofing felt, bundles of shingles that had been strapped to the backs of 2 chase trucks. Men scaled the building like they'd done it 100 times before. There were contractors, electricians, plumbers, a man who ran a glass company, 2 brothers who specialized in HVAC. In minutes, the roof was swarming with angels tearing off waterlogged plywood, the cracked skylight, the rotted fascia boards. Inside, Doc and two others quietly replaced the broken window in the kitchen, fixed the dangling cabinet hinges, snaked the slow-draining sink. They worked in silence, not a single curse, not a single beer opened. This was sacred work. Mabel sat in her recliner watching her home transform. Andre sat on the floor beside her, her hand on his head. Stone stood at the window like a sentinel. At one point, a neighbor, a man named Mr. Cephas who had lived next door for 20 years, knocked on the frame and said, "I don't know what's happening, but if these men are giving you trouble, I got a shotgun." Mabel laughed, a sound she hadn't made in months. "They're fixing the roof, Cephas. Go back to bed." But the night held a deeper revelation. Just before midnight, Sarge arrived in a van, his wheelchair lift lowering him to the cracked asphalt. He insisted on coming inside. The big man wheeled himself into that tiny living room, the cut now draped across his lap, and he took Mabel's hands in his own. "Your grandson," he said, his voice still weak. "He gave me back my son and my wife." Mabel didn't understand until Sarge opened the cut's inner lining and showed her the faded patches. A Marine Corps emblem, a lock of hair stitched into the fabric, a wedding photo so worn it was nearly transparent. "I lost my boy in Fallujah. My wife passed the next year. I carry them with me every ride. When the wreck took this vest, I lost them. Your boy found them. He found my family." Mabel pulled the biker's head down to her shoulder and held him. The room grew still. Stone turned from the window, his voice rough. "There's something else you need to know. That bank notice on your counter. We called the bank. The eviction's been canceled. The property management company has been bought. You own this apartment now, free and clear. And your granddaughter's tuition, it's covered. Not just this year, all 4 years. The Angels have a scholarship fund. She's the first recipient." Andre stared. He didn't understand how any of this was possible. But he saw the worn Bible on the table, the letter from the bank that had been folded and refolded, and he knew the weight that had crushed his grandmother's back was now gone. He began to cry again, and this time he couldn't stop. Stone knelt beside him. "You walked into a room full of men twice your size, and you did what was right. You didn't flinch. That makes you braver than most grown men I know. You're not just family, you're our brother, and brothers protect their own." By 2 in the morning, the roof was sealed. The windows gleamed. The kitchen had a new stove, donated by a club member who owned a restaurant supply. The bathroom had a working fan. The front door, which had stuck for years, swung smoothly. The Angels gathered in the parking lot, tools packed, faces streaked with sweat and dust. Mabel, cane in hand, walked down the stairs unassisted for the first time in a year. She looked at the sea of leather and chrome and said simply, "Y'all hungry?" Stone laughed, a sound like rocks grinding. "Ma'am, we could eat." So at 3 a.m. the parking lot became a cookout. Grills appeared from trucks, meat from a cooler. Bikers and neighbors and children who had crept out to see the commotion sat on the curb and ate. It was the most alive that block had been since its construction. And as the first gray light of dawn began to bleach the sky, a line of Harleys formed again, their riders mounting up. But before they left, Stone walked over to Mabel and pressed something into her hand. A silver ring, heavy and old, engraved with the club's winged skull. "You call this number if you ever need anything," he said, sliding a card into the same hand. "Any angel in the country will answer. That's not a promise. That's a fact." Then the engines roared one last time, and the convoy pulled away, leaving behind a house no longer dying, a family no longer invisible, and a 12-year-old boy who had learned that honor is not a color or a patch. It's a door you open when the world tells you to keep it shut. But the real change was just beginning to ripple outward, because word had spread beyond this one chapter. The president's forewords had lit a fuse that would reach the National Council, spark a youth mentorship program, and force the town to reckon with who it had truly abandoned. And by the next sunset, Andre would be standing in front of a room full of men wearing patches, learning a lesson none of them had ever taught before, that the greatest power a man can have is the courage to return what he finds, and the grace to accept what's given. The next sunset, Andre stood before a congregation of leather and ink, not as a boy who had found something, but as a brother who had been found. The room was the clubhouse of the Hells Angels National Council, a sprawling timber frame hall in the foothills of the Sierra, where the chapter presidents from 4 states had gathered for their quarterly meet. Andre walked in flanked by Stone and Sarge, the latter now walking with a cane but upright, his cut restored to his back. The room went still. Men with road names like Grim and Tank and Preacher rose to their feet. A patch had been made for Andre, a small black and silver emblem with a single word, honor. Stone pinned it to the boy's chest himself. 4 words I said in that bar, Stone told the assembly, and I meant everyone. This boy isn't just family. He's the proof that what we stand for still matters. He walked into a room full of strangers and did what was right, not for reward, not for fear. Because a woman who raised him taught him to return what he found. That kind of character doesn't just deserve respect, it deserves a legacy. That night, the council voted unanimously to create the Mabel Campbell Youth Initiative, named after Andre's grandmother, a program that would mentor at-risk youth in cities across the country, pairing kids with club members who would teach them skilled trades, provide academic scholarships, and most importantly, show up. The first chapter would launch in Andre's own neighborhood, using a refurbished garage donated by a club sponsor. Within a year, 15 boys and girls who had been written off by the system were learning to rebuild engines and, in the process, rebuilding themselves. The ripples didn't stop there. Jada, Andre's sister, walked into her first day of high school with a scholarship letter already cashed, her tuition paid through her senior year. She became the first person in their family to make honor roll, her backpack stuffed with books and a gift from Sarge, a laminated copy of the Marine Corps Leadership Principles, with the note, "Lead always." Mabel, her health now stable after regular visits from Doc, opened her apartment on Thursday afternoons for what the neighbors called Grandma's Homework Club, where she sat in her recliner and read aloud from the Bible and the newspaper. The building itself, no longer facing condemnation, became a hub. The Angels returned every spring to check the roof, repaint the trim, fix whatever needed fixing. The landlord who tried to evict them sold the entire complex to a community land trust that kept rents permanently affordable. There was no press release about it. The Angels just made some calls. That's how they worked. One morning, 6 months after the cookout in the parking lot, Andre woke to find a new bike on the doorstep. Not a motorcycle, a bicycle, a custom-built chrome-framed cruiser with an engraved plate that read, "To the bravest brother we know, ride on." It had been assembled by club members from spare parts, each one contributing a piece from his own first bike. Andre never found out who exactly built it. He only knew that when he pedaled to school, the roar of a Harley often followed a few blocks behind, a quiet escort until he reached the crossing. Then came the detail that no one saw coming. A year after the storm, a man showed up at Mabel's door. He was gaunt, his hands calloused and shaking, wearing a faded trucking company jacket. He asked for the boy who had found Sarge's cut. When Andre came forward, the man broke down. He was the driver of the semi that had blown the tire, the one who had swerved and sent Sarge into the guardrail. He had fled the scene, terrified, and had been living with the guilt ever since. He'd seen the news of the club's generosity and traced the story back. He spent an hour in Mabel's living room, confessing, apologizing, offering to make amends however he could. Andre, now 13, listened, then did something that made Mabel's eyes fill with tears. He said, "You made a mistake. You were scared. We all get scared, but you came back. That matters." The truck driver, a man who hadn't spoken to his own son in years, sat down with Stone and Sarge and eventually joined the mentorship program as a volunteer, teaching kids about road safety and the weight of regret. The final surprise was something even Stone hadn't expected. At the next National Council, a motion was raised to formally recognize the 4 words that had started it all. They were carved into the clubhouse doorframe. "This boy is family." But below it, another line was added, proposed by Sarge and seconded by every member who had been in that bar that day. "Courage returns. Honor remains." Andre stood in front of that door, tracing the letters with his finger, understanding for the first time that what had happened wasn't about a jacket or a favor. It was about a chain reaction of decency, one that had transformed a club, a family, and an entire community. The boy who had been invisible was now the center of a circle he could never have imagined. And as he turned to walk away, Stone placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Son, the door you opened that day is the door you'll walk through the rest of your life. What you found in that ditch wasn't just a vest, it was your purpose. Go live it." Which is exactly what he did. And here's the thing that sticks with you long after the engines fade. Andre was 12. He was cold, tired, and had every reason to keep walking. He knew what that cut represented, the danger attached to it, the assumptions the world makes about men in leather and ink. He could have left it in the ditch. He could have hidden it, sold it, thrown it away. Instead, he listened to the quiet voice of his grandmother. What you find, you return, and walked into a room that could have broken him. That choice, that single, trembling act of decency, didn't just change his life. It rewired the club, rebuilt a neighborhood, and forced every person who heard the story to ask a deeply uncomfortable question. Would I have done the same? The 5 doors that said no to Sarge weren't monsters. They were people just like us, convinced their fear was prudence, that a man's appearance was enough to shut a door on his life. Andre, a child who had been taught by the world that he was invisible, saw a person. Not a patch, not a threat, a person. The Hell's Angels carved 4 words into a door. This boy is family. But what they really carved was a mirror for the rest of us. Every time we cross the street or lock a car door or look away, we choose a door to close. Every time we see a stranger in need and move toward them instead of away, we choose to open it. Somewhere tonight, a boy is walking a dark road, and something is waiting for him to find it. The question isn't whether he'll have the courage to return it. The question is whether you, when your moment comes, will be the 7th door. If this story moved you, leave a light in the comments, a heart, a word, a promise to keep your door open. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Share this with someone who needs reminding that quiet courage still changes the world. Because somewhere out there, somebody's still knocking. Be the one who answers.